Join me as I dive deep into the rich history of Cuban jazz and uncover its African roots. Let's see if I can connect the musical dots. The fusion of African rhythms and Cuban instrumentation is a cultural connection that's often overlooked, yet it's precisely this intersection that gives Cuban jazz its unique flavor. It's time to give credit where credit is due and recognize the incredible debt Cuban jazz owes to its African roots. One of the biggest misconceptions about Cuban jazz is that it developed in isolation, a unique blend of Spanish guitar and indigenous percussion. But that's simply not the case. Cuban jazz was shaped by the cultural exchange between African slaves and their Spanish colonizers. You can't talk about one without the other. The truth is, African influences seeped into every aspect of Cuban music, from the rhythms to the instrumentation. The African diaspora played a huge role in shaping Cuban jazz, with enslaved Africans bringing their musical traditions to the island. It's no coincidence that Cuban jazz is characterized by its strong rhythmic pulse. That's a direct result of African influences. And let's not forget the instrumentation. Cuban jazz often features percussion instruments like congas and timbales, which have their roots in African drumming traditions. The rich cultural heritage of African slaves was not lost on the island. In fact, it was precisely this cultural exchange that gave birth to some of the most iconic Cuban jazz musicians, like Afro-Cuban jazz pioneer Chano Pozo. Pozo's music was a testament to the fusion of African rhythms and Cuban instrumentation, and it's hard to imagine Cuban jazz without his contributions. The transatlantic slave trade had a profound impact on the development of Cuban jazz. The forced migration of enslaved Africans to the Americas resulted in a cultural exchange that shaped not only music but also art, literature, and even cuisine. It's impossible to separate Cuban jazz from its African roots. They're inextricably linked. As we delve deeper into the historical context, it becomes clear that African rhythms and musical traditions were the backbone of Cuban jazz. The Yoruba people of West Africa, for example, brought their sacred rhythms to the island, which eventually found their way into Cuban jazz. It's no surprise that some of the most iconic Cuban jazz pieces feature complex polyrhythms that are characteristic of African drumming traditions. One of the most stunning examples of African influences in Cuban jazz is the music of legendary trumpeter Arturo Sandoval. His album Rumba Palace is a masterpiece of Afro-Cuban jazz, featuring complex rhythms and instrumentation that pay homage to African traditions. Sandoval's music is living proof of the incredible cultural exchange that took place on the island. Tito Puente's Hoy Como Va is another iconic piece that showcases the fusion of African and Cuban elements. The song's driving rhythm and percussion are unmistakably African, yet the melody is quintessentially Cuban. It's a testament to the incredible cultural exchange that defined Cuban jazz. In conclusion, the African roots of Cuban jazz are undeniable. From the rhythms to the instrumentation, it's clear that African influences played a huge role in shaping this unique cultural phenomenon. By acknowledging and celebrating these roots, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity and richness of Cuban jazz. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the rich history of Cuban jazz. If you have any thoughts or opinions on this topic, please leave them in the comments below. And if you're interested in exploring more intersections of music and culture, be sure to check out our next video, where we'll be diving into the fascinating world of Afrobeat.